Welcome everyone to I think the third workshop in the Jozi PAUDC X Dutch EUDC collaboration. I'll be taking this one, and as advertised, it's about preempting from OG. I'm going to share some slides on my screen. Can I confirm that these slides are visible to people who are here? Great, I can see some reactions. And just to check, if I switch the slide, you're able to see that it's on a different slide now, I think with a bunch of logistics. Fantastic. Give me 1 second to rearrange all of these things on the screen. Forgot how many things there are on Zoom. Yeah, so welcome everyone to this workshop. As advertised, it's about preempting from OG. Little bit of logistics. I will be posting these slides online. That's my website. I can also send you a link to this. The recording will be posted on the Dutch EUDC YouTube channel very shortly afterwards. We'll figure out some uploading things to do with that. And I'll comment the slides under the video as well. So the slides and the recording will be made available to you. At a couple of points throughout this session, I will stop and ask you to think about something and give you like a minute or two to do so. I do really encourage you to do this. It's one thing for me to talk about concepts and things that you should do. It's another thing to actually think about it yourself, and you'll be able to see immediately, have you done the exercise in the way it was intended, and get some learning out of that. So I think that's really helpful. If you are just like watching the recording later on, I think like obviously you can skip ahead, but you should still think about these things first. If you have any questions, questions are great. If they're related to the slide that we're looking at the moment, just raise your hand on Zoom. I should be able to see that. Or you can type your question in the Zoom chat and we'll answer that. Otherwise, if you have any general questions, you can sort of make a note of them, and there is time for questions and answers at the end as well. Right. In terms of what I'll be going through today, firstly, a brief introduction about what preemption is. Secondly, and this is where we'll focus a lot of our time, is sort of examples, strategies, exercises about effective preemption from opening government and Prime Minister in particular, since this is the position where you have the least ability to respond to everyone else in the debate, and preemption matters the most. And finally, we'll make a couple of comments as well about other positions and things that you might want to keep in mind for those, because a lot of these things that I'm going to go through do apply to other positions as well and can be quite useful. Right, starting with the problem. So this is something that happens reasonably often. You're in OG, you have some arguments, you run them decently well. But OO might run an argument that you didn't expect, and you don't really know how to respond to it while you're listening to LO make this great case. Maybe DLO backloads and does a bunch of responses, runs some new substantive material, and by the speaking order, you have no ability to respond. Even though if you'd known that they were going to say this, you could probably respond to it quite satisfactorily. Or maybe CG and CO run new cases that just beat you, and you could have responses in mind. You could be able to explain to me why those cases are not very good and your case is stronger, but you just don't have any speeches left. And I think this is a reasonably common problem because BP is very fast paced. In opening government, you do really have very limited ability to respond. You only have 15 minutes of prep, and only responsive speech you have is the DPM, which can even then only respond to LO and not the 5 speeches that come after. So this is a problem that lots of people have when they first come across BP debating, and even when they've been here for some time. It's very fast paced and these sorts of things can happen to you. How do we respond to that? I think the solution is that we call preemption. And I've put the dictionary definition on the slide here, just to make sure that I wasn't making up meanings of English words. I don't think the dictionary definition is actually super helpful here. This seems to be one of those debating specific jargon words that might mean something slightly different within debating as opposed to in the English language in general. And what I think I mean, or what I think preemption means, or what I mean when I say preemption, is generally thinking about the debate as a whole, including what the other side is likely to argue, in advance of all of this happening. So that part of it comes from sort of the general English meaning. We want to be thinking about what's going to happen in a debate before it happens, so that we're able to act accordingly and more effectively in a way that is useful to us. Right. So this is what I mean by preemption. You want to think about what's going to happen in the entirety of the debate before it happens, and adjust your strategy and make your case accordingly. Now, how could we preempt things that might come up? One way of doing preemption that I see every now and then, but tends to be less effective, is maybe towards the end of the PM speech, when you've run an argument or two, someone might come up and say, "Oh, might argue, blah, blah, blah." And if they do, our responses to this are A, B, and C. This is, I think, a very beginner approach to preemption. It's good that you've recognized that there are these arguments that might come and challenge your case. But this tends not to be the best use of your time at PM for a number of reasons. Op doesn't have to make the argument that you've just suggested. Because you've pre-given the responses, they can just adjust their analysis to work around your responses. And this is something that you should try to do as a speaker, and stronger speakers will often do. And generally, there will be better uses of your time at PM. You could run another argument. You could make your analysis more detailed and substantiated. You could do more impacting and weighing. And I think in my experience, those things are generally more likely to last towards the end of the debate, as opposed to this list of potential responses that may or may not apply in the round. So what could we do instead that tends to be a bit more effective? I've identified a couple of things here, and we will go through these in a fair bit of detail and in a number of worked examples in the following slides. The first is, when this is applicable, deleting arguments through modeling and characterization. The second is identifying what the underlying clash is and winning it. The third is sort of outweighing an argument or deciding actively and making an informed decision to ignore it, hopefully. And the final one, which is also quite useful, is making your arguments in a way that is robust to the likely challenges that might come up. And we're going to go through these in a bit more detail. What sorts of, how do we do and identify these threats before the debate that happens? And this is something you have to do before you can preempt an argument. If you don't know what you're preempting, then you can't really do a great deal of preemption. And the main way you can do this before speakers actually say what they're going to run is to actively incorporate this into part of your prep. So preemption starts from prep. If there's one thing you take away from this session, it's that your goal during prep, especially at OG, shouldn't just be to come up with 2 or 3 arguments so you can say something in your speech, but rather to try and understand the debate as a whole, and prepare both sides, essentially, before you decide on what you're running, to hopefully cover more of, cover the bases of the debate a little bit more. There's lots of different ways you can prep both sides. One thing that seems to work for a lot of teams is they begin with 2 minutes or so of silent individual prep. During this time, maybe both speakers will be thinking about both sides. So if I'm prepping a case from OG, I'm thinking about what other thoughts that are coming to my mind, what are the reasons for and against doing something. This will generally include reasons for both sides, as opposed to exclusively thinking about what sorts of arguments I want to make from PM. Another way this could work, and I've also done this as well on other team pairings, is that one speaker, usually the first speaker, will prep their side of the motion, and another speaker, usually the second speaker, will prep the other side for those first few minutes of silent individual prep, and then you'll confer. Once you've done the silent individual prep, having tried to think about both sides of the debate instead of just your own, you then sort of do the usual thing of discussing your ideas, sharing them, you identify the areas of clash and decide the case that you're going to run. And that case will often include how you deal with major arguments at a high level, Maybe you'll leave some of this to DPM if PM is overloaded or you haven't figured it out. And sometimes the details of this will be figured out while developing the arguments themselves later in prep. So the sort of prep time structure I'm recommending here is starting with silent prep for maybe 2 minutes or so. Then you share your ideas, confer, identify points of clash and what you're going to do. That could be the next 3 minutes or so. That takes up to 5 minutes. And then the last 10 minutes, ideally, is like working out the details of the case. So discussing, like talking through the first argument, the things you want to say, in mechanization, contextualization, mechanisms, impacting, weighing, and so on, and making sure that you've hit the core points within that. And DPM could also be thinking a bit more about the other side during that time as well. Right. So once you've prepped both sides, during that prep time process, you'll probably identify a bunch of different threats from the other side. This could also come quite naturally. Quite often, you might read a motion and think, this is obviously a bad idea. Here are all of the things I would want to say if I were on OO instead of OG. So once you've identified those threats, you could use any combination of these following approaches to deal with those arguments or threats. The first of these is modeling and characterization. So sometimes arguments will rely on emotion happening in a very specific way. And I'm going to quote badly here. So sometimes arguments will depend on like something being done badly or poor implementation of the motion, as vague as that is. And in these situations, these are just tend not to be the greatest arguments, and you'll be able to delete them through modeling or characterization. And I think that brings us to our first example and exercise. So the motion here, we're going to do an example, is this house believes that developing countries should adopt English as the primary language of instruction in schools. I think I set this at the HWSIV in 2021. Variations of this have also been set all over the place. And one perhaps quite natural op argument in this debate is something to the effect of people will forget their native language and lose touch with their culture and identity as a result of this. I'm going to give us a minute to think about how you might delete this argument through modeling specifically. So I'll give you a minute to think about this, and then I'll ask us to share ideas if we have any brave volunteers. All right, that's a minute. Does anyone want to share their ideas for how we could sort of delete this argument through modeling?
I don't mind trying.
Go for it.
All right. This may be a bit incoherent, but I think I would probably try to model that when you're looking at the primary language of instruction, this is just like how you interact with people in a formal capacity, but people do still, engage in like social events informally where you grow your language. So, for example, when you go back and meet your grandparents, or you meet in much more cultural settings, something like that.
Yeah, I think this is a good idea. And this, I think, would certainly work to some extent. How I would sort of describe what you're doing here is I think you're characterizing what the world is likely to look like. So even if English is the primary language of instruction in schools, even if you're teaching absolutely everything in schools in English, people are still going to be talking to their friends, their families, their grandparents, and parents in their native language. So they're probably still going to remember it. And there's other variations of this as well, right? You're probably still using your native language before you go to school. When you're learning your first words at home, your parents are still probably speaking their native language to you. And you can point to examples of countries that have done this as well. And I think this is, I guess, it could be a useful piece of characterization to preempt this argument. But I do want to flag something here about this motion. This might not have been true at the time that this was set in 2021. But the phrasing of this motion is this House believes that developing countries should do something. And under the World's Manual since, I think, at least last year, these motions give us modeling power, which means that we can describe exactly how we're going to implement English as the primary language of instruction in schools. And this is something we can do by just pure fiat. So if we say, you'll teach this for 5 hours each day in XYZ ways, as long as this is a reasonable reading of the motion, that's just the policy that you've put forward at opening government. It becomes the policy that the debate is about, and it's not something that other teams can challenge as long as it's reasonable. So I think this modeling power is actually very strong and allows you to do things that can be quite effective. Did anyone come up with thoughts about how you might do this policy in a way that makes sure people still remember their language, that native language, and their identity and culture within schools, perhaps?
Can I try and
Yes,
answer
go
that?
for it.
So I think like in the wording where it says a primary language of instruction, it wouldn't mean that it's the only language of instruction. So other languages that could, support people learning more of their native languages can still be supported by these schools.
Yeah, exactly. The burden here isn't to make English the only language of instruction in schools. It's just the primary language, right? And this is something you can get from reading the motion carefully, perhaps also thinking about other places where this sort of policy has been implemented. So I think the answer here is you can explicitly model in some degree of native language teaching. I'm going to check what I've got on the slide. So I've got, as part of the model, we will still teach local languages in schools. In fact, we'll make it a core subject, maybe like how Singapore does it. So Singapore has this mother tongue policy where so most of your classes are taught in English, but you still learn your native language. I think in Singapore, this tends to be Chinese or Malay or Tamil to a fairly high level. So it's still a core subject. And in fact, we can teach like maths and science and whatever in English. But if it's local history, culture, and politics, usually I think most education systems around the world will expect you to learn some degree of it. That will still be taught in the local language. So I think this is, hopefully it's clear that this is fairly effective model, fairly effective thing to do here. Because this piece of setup, as I've written it down, only takes about 10 seconds at the top of PM. It's just one point of setup that you could do along with other points of setup that you might make as well. And if this is how the policy is set up, I think it's very difficult to make this op argument about how people are going to lose their native language. You're still being taught this as like a fairly important subject that you'll be examined on within schools. You're still learning about history and politics within your local language, right? So this is something you can do quite easily in 10 seconds, and it just deletes this argument that op might be trying to do in the round. The thing to say about modeling, though, is you want to make sure that you do this at PM very early on, or if you're counter modeling at LO, and ideally at the top of your speech, because there's no modeling fiat after this. You can't be like at DPM, you can't go, actually, we're going to add all of these details to the policy. You can do that, but you can't do it by pure fiat. You'd have to show that this is a likely part of the policy after PM and LO when you have the ability to model things by pure fiat. All right, hopefully this is clear. I think the next version of this is when you can't sort of model explicitly. So lots of motions are like this house supports, this house opposes, this house regrets, prefers, believes that something that isn't in the form of THBT, X should do Y. You might also be able to do some degree of characterization, and sometimes people will call this framing, even though I'm not terribly fond of the word framing because people use it to mean about 100 different things. Although when you do things via characterization as opposed to modeling, it is up for debate and it's therefore not going to be as powerful. What you want to do in these situations is to identify the characterization or the comparative or the counterfactual, if it's a retrospective debate, and briefly explain why it is likely. So let's do another worked example. The motion is this House opposes central bank independence. So central bank independence generally just means the central bank gets to do its own thing when it comes to monetary policy. They can set interest rates. They can decide to print money or not, buy bonds or not. And those things will affect the economy. I think most countries have independent central banks these days, but not all of them. The op argument that op team might run is, and I don't think this is a very good argument, is you will not have expertise. Politicians are not experts in monetary policy. They don't know what they're doing. How might you be able to counter this argument in setup or characterization? Noting that because it's this House opposes, you don't actually have fiat to assert that something will happen in a certain way. I'll give us, let's say, 30 seconds to think about this. Right, that's 30 seconds. Any volunteers? No. This one might be a little bit trickier. I think what you would want to say, and if the motion were something like this House would abolish central bank independence, you'd be able to say, is something like, it's just not going to be politicians doing whatever they want on the basis of absolutely nothing. The central bank's still going to exist. The civil service is still going to exist. They're still going to have experts analyzing these things. And the only difference is that you present that expert analysis to the politicians who make that final decision. So everything up to that point of analyzing, researching what's going on in the economy, considering different options, using that expertise by experts within the central bank or the civil service is still going to happen. The only difference here is that politicians make the final decision on the basis of that. Because it's THO, you can't assert that by modeling fiat. But I think you can do, but I think you can characterize this as being a very natural implementation of the policy. And I think this is empirically how things work in some countries where you don't have an independent central bank. This is basically how I think the UK worked before 1997. It's also to an extent how the Chinese central bank works as well. So what I would say here is something like the civil service, including experts, will still exist and give advice to the government. The only change is that the government makes final decisions after considering this advice. And in fact, I've almost treated this as a model here on my slides. Because this is characterization, not modeling, even though it's also part of setup, this is challengeable by the other side. So Opt can argue that actually the likely case in Gov world is the civil service doesn't exist anymore. They can argue this. I think if they choose to argue that, which I don't think is a very good strategy, then DPM can respond and be like, here are a bunch of reasons why you still want the civil, like the civil service is still going to exist. The experts are still going to be part of the central bank and give all of this advice. You could deal with it then. But I think this is probably enough here. I would just say this, and if Op wants to challenge the likelihood of this, DPM can deal with it. I think in the vast majority of cases, and intuitively, this is probably how central bank independence gets taken away. This is just a little bit more detail here on the slide. Yeah, so oh no, this is another exercise. I've just I think ordered my slides slightly incorrectly. This is why the slides get published after the workshop. Right, another exercise, still the same motion. This house opposes central bank independence. The argument this time is that governments have perverse incentives to set inappropriate interest rates, inappropriately low interest rates, which cause high inflation. I'll give us, let's say, 30 seconds again to think about this and how you might counter this argument and sort of setup or characterization of what the world looks like. Okay, that's 30 seconds. And Henry, you've raised your hand. Do you want to give this a go?
Yeah, all or nothing. So my way I would preempt this, I'll do that at the end of the day. So the problem is that
Sorry, I think there might be some connection issues. I can't hear you very clearly. Do you want to maybe type that in the Zoom chat, or does anyone else want to have a go?
Okay, can I try?
Yeah, of course. Let's go James and then Becky.
All right, so I really don't have the exact explanation, but I think I'll just try to characterize why low interest rates and high inflation is just bad for the politicians, and that the effects that happen with high inflation just make them unpopular. So I think that's what I'll try to explain. I don't know exactly what, but that's how I'll try to explain it.
Yeah, I think that's really good. And in fact, that's exactly what I would do in sort of setup and characterization before maybe going into a bit more detail later as part of an argument or to respond to the other side. Becky, did you have anything you wanted to add to that, or was that also what you had in mind?
I think the first thing is just to question why the interest of the government are so narrowed down, as it mentioned. I think first is to expand the scope of government interest, and then, do what Jim says, which is to prove that this just doesn't work for government and it's counterintuitive to government interest, something like that.
Yeah, exactly. This is what I have written down. It's basically what the two of you have said. We think governments would set appropriate interest rates. People do really care about inflation. Think about how many governments were voted out over cost of living concerns after COVID. So governments have a strong reason to set appropriate interest rates. If I were PM, depending on what I were arguing, I would probably just say this in setup or characterization, because this is an argument that I think op is very likely to run. This doesn't resolve the clash entirely, because it's still up for debate what government's interests are, what they're likely to do. But I think it does make it clear what the prop stance is here, and gives us something that's relatively easy to defend going forward for the rest of the debate. I've got a link here that will be part of the slides. It's another workshop I did a couple of months ago, which is just a bit more about setting up debates in general, as opposed to specifically on preemption. So if you're a PM or an LO and you want to set up debates effectively, that would be a really good workshop to look at as well. Right, back to preemption. The second approach, and another very common one that you can apply more generally, as opposed to modeling or characterization, which I think applies to very specific kinds of arguments, is that quite often arguments for the other side will reveal an area of clash that you can win. In these situations, what you want to do is to identify what that area of clash is and consider running some positive material to actively win that area of clash. So not just rebut the argument the other side has said, but flip it to your side as well. So let's do another example. There's an info slide. This is a motion from Oxford WSDC, but I think it could also very well be set in a BP debate as well. For the purposes of this debate, Green parties can take one of two approaches: green centrism or green progressivism. Green centrism involves focusing on environmental issues and being willing to work with right-wing parties. Green progressivism, in contrast, involves also focusing on social justice issues and refusing to work with right-wing parties. And the motion is that Green parties should practice green centrism as opposed to green progressivism. The op argument I want us to consider, which I think is a very natural op line in this debate, is that Green parties will lose support under green centrism. And I note here that this is not something that we can model out, even though this is a policy or an action motion where you have modeling fiat. And you can't just say that, like, by fiat, Green parties will get more support, or they're going to keep all of the support that they currently have. That's not the action that you're taking in the motion. And this is an outcome that teams will debate. So I'll give us 30 seconds to think about this. First question is sort of, what is the underlying area of clash here? And then once you've identified that, how could OG win this area of clash? Sorry, I missed this a bit earlier, but the answer Henry's given us in Zoom is also the one we came up with. The government has economists and structures to mitigate this. There is a lot of expertise that doesn't disappear when central banks aren't independent. All right. Any ideas, volunteers for this exercise?
Can I try?
Go for it.
Okay, so I would think that the clash that this op argument is attempting to introduce is one of buy-in. So which approach is likely to bring the most buy-in? And so you could say that with green centrism, it appeals to people who who are also working within institutions and other areas that relate to how green parties are interacting with their causes, and that through their inclusion it means that there's legitimacy in the movement, as opposed to green progressivism, which is likely to be politicized. I don't know, I'm just throwing a lot in there.
I think this is a really good idea, and what I've got written down, it's basically what I've got. The clash is one of buy-in, or just who has more support, who's going to get more votes for green parties. And the positive argument that you would run here is that green centrism gets green parties more support. And there's lots of different ways you could run this argument, or lots of different mechanisms you could use here. You could describe sort of a depoliticizing of environmental issues. That means institutions and governments are more interested in supporting Green Party policies. It could be something about how a lot of moderate or right-wing voters still care about the environment, but are unlikely to vote for Green parties if they've got all of this other left-wing policy around social justice tied in. And if it were just focused on the environment, this is something that could appeal to a lot of people in the center or on the right who still care about the environment. And you could add many more mechanisms or approaches here for how that happens. But the basic idea here is that this is an op argument you might identify in prep. You might have a prop argument that directly addresses this, or you might realize that, okay, there is a big question in this debate about who gets more support for Green parties or who gets them more votes. And instead of just giving a couple of miscellaneous responses to this or waiting for this op argument to happen, you can start even from PM. First argument or second argument is about how green centrism gets Green parties more support. James, was that a hand up?
Yes. Yeah, so I just wanted to ask, I mean, obviously, like we're looking at ways to preempt, right? And I just wanted to ask, at what point do you draw the line between, because this is probably at the top of your speech, right? So you're making to the top of your speech, but it seems like you then are going to dive into explaining a whole argument on incentives as to why, the Green Party is now. And so how then do you do that? Do you just give the basic response and then say you like get it, you do it into your speech? Because I've had judges say that, you want to have a bit of structure. And so I don't know how that then plays in when you're actually executing it.
I see. There's lots of different ways to do this. I think the high-level structure of a PM speech would usually go quick introduction of about 15 seconds, then some setup for about 15 to 30 seconds. Then I would go first, at OG, we're going to present two arguments. The first one about getting more support for Green parties, the second one having more climate action. And then I go straight into the first argument. And then within the argument itself, which I think is perhaps what you were asking about a bit more, I would just run the argument normally. So I would label the argument clearly. Green centrism gets Green parties more support. Then I would start with like some characterization of what the world looks like. Then I would give a bunch of mechanisms for how Green parties get support or get more support. So it could be like support. One, you get more support from moderates and conservatives who still do care about environmental issues. They weren't willing to vote for the Green Party before because it was unclear what they stood for. They focused on all of this other stuff as well. Now, that's no longer a problem. They're like, this is a Green Party that they can get on board with. Two, you might be seen as more serious because now you have more institutional support and issues are less politicized. There's not a lot of right-wing press going around being like, this party is crazy, we can't possibly trust them. And therefore, this also makes them seem more credible and get more support, and so on and so on, right? So a couple of mechanisms. What is the impact of this? What is the outcome of this? So on, right? So I'm not sure if I'm going to go into that much detail in these slides about how you make the argument exactly. But the overall idea here is this is something that op might run. It's something you want to deal with. How you deal with it is generally, I'm going to make an argument, which is just you have more support. And while I'm making that argument, and I think there might be a slide about this later, I will want to make it in a way that is robust to the challenges that are likely to come up from the other side, and perhaps address some of those challenges if need be. I saw a thumbs up. It seems like that answers the question. Right. Here is another example. Great. Here's another example. This one comes with a long info slide. I'm going to let you read this. So I'll give us, let's say, a minute or so to read this info slide. The motion is this House believes that the Cook Islands-China Agreement is in the interests of the Cook Islands people. You can read the info slide to figure out what the agreement is. And I think after reading the info slide, one of the off arguments that will come naturally, since it's described in the info slide to some extent, is that the Cook Islands currently gets a bunch of money from New Zealand. It's going to lose that money. So I'll give you a minute to read this. What is the underlying area of clash and how could OG win that area of clash? Right. That's a minute. Does anyone have an answer for this? Okay, I'll just give you an answer that I've got on the slide. Cool.
Hi. Oh, sorry.
Henry, you want to have a
My
go?
answer. Yeah. The flash I'm seeing here is the flash on where do you lose money less? Because at the end of the day, if you lose the deal with New Zealand or China, you still lose money. I still think the clash on gap is the win because China has more capacity to help you more than New Zealand does, and they have a bigger budget and bigger people that probably give you more money to that infrastructure. So it could seem symmetric, but imagine it's with China, so you have more money on the other side. That's what's in my head at the moment. I don't know if it's fair.
Excellent. Yeah, the question is just who gets more money. And the argument you would run is that you get more money with the agreement. And there's lots of different parts to this argument that you could run. You could explain that China has more money to give you than New Zealand. I think you could explain why New Zealand is more likely to now have to give you even more money to compete with China as opposed to pulling out. This would also be a part of the argument that you could run. I think a little bit of time has passed and empirically that hasn't turned out to be true. But yeah, there are different ways you can make this argument. The basic idea here is how you respond to this isn't just saying that, no, you're not going to lose the money from New Zealand. You want to make a positive argument on this larger question about who gets more money, and you could explain how China has more to offer you. They want to seem good. They have more capacity, more incentive, whatever. Great. Here is a final one, which is a little bit trickier. I drew OG on this motion, and I did not want to be OG, even though maybe CG is worse. The motion is this house is a feminist movement, opposes Mattels, so that's the company that makes Barbie, making of Barbie dolls out of feminist icons, e.g. Amelia Earhart, Frida Kahlo, Katherine Johnson, etc. And the op argument here, which I think comes quite naturally, is just this will inspire more girls to become aviators, activists, scientists, etc. So Amelia Earhart was a prominent aviator. He was the first to do lots of flights between different places. Frida Kahlo, a prominent artist and activist, commented about social issues, and Katherine Johnson, a scientist who worked at NASA, I think, on the moon landing. There's a film about her. Right. What is the area of clash and how could OG win it? 30 seconds to think about.
Okay.
Yes,
I
Henry?
do have something. Okay, I do have something. It's a bit abstract. I think the clash is what allows feminist movements to fight for women's interests better. So I think in the world where you oppose the making of these dolls is a far better one because feminist movements don't stand for specific groups of people, but they're supposed to stand for every individual's struggles. Creating Barbie dolls to inspire another group of individuals robs them of their active ability to be able to be who they are and what they want to be in the world where they would have multiple choices. You restrict that specific thing. So if it's a clash on what one serves women's interests better, I think Gulf side serves that women's interests better because we allow you to be the kind of woman you want to be, to explore all the different options to be that woman and not limited to being one specific type of woman that a Barbie doll probably has tried up for you. I think the feminist movement wins better on our side because they cater for more women and give them more options outside.
I see. I think this is a really interesting argument. It's not the one I had in mind. I think you could probably argue that this perhaps constrains people or pushes them in specific directions. I think the difficulty with that would be that this is not an exhaustive list of examples, but rather you're presumably doing this for a bunch more feminist icons as well, which I think makes it kind of difficult to argue that this constrains people in specific ways. Did anyone else have thoughts on perhaps the more immediate clash that engages with this argument? Becky, was that a hand or just a thumbs up?
No, just a thumbs up.
Okay. James, you've got your hand up?
Yeah, again, spitballing here, I would say I think maybe the area of clash is like change, because I would imagine if Op is saying it inspires them to become girls, I think this is like the whole goal of the feminist movement. So I think probably center clash, I think, is about change. How we could flip this is, I think I would probably try to explain why, for some reason I don't know yet, uh, posing these doors, frankly, we tap into that sentiment that, you know, I'm not exactly sure, but like just
Yeah.
really show why why opposing the doors gathers us more support. I just don't know the thing.
Yeah. I think this is a difficult argument to make. And part of the reason well, we still proceeded on OG, but this is not the position I wanted. So the underlying clash, or the very direct area of clash, is just who inspires more girls, right? Op says they inspire more girls to be aviators, activists, scientists, and so on. The question is the most immediate question is just who gets more girls interested in science and other fields. And what I want to argue on OG, seeing that if OO doesn't make this argument for some reason, CO definitely will, is that these dolls actually hurt the cause of getting, I think this should say, young girls interested in science and other fields. So this is the argument that I want to run. It's not the easiest argument to run. This is a sketch of what we came up with. Children are play with Barbie dolls at a very young age when they're really impressionable. The nature of Barbie dolls makes for a strong subconscious association between inherent Barbie features, like needing to look a certain way, serve tea parties, etc. And these figures or their careers, that is unhelpful and off-putting. So basically, what I'm arguing here is that these Barbie dolls create an association in the minds of quite impressionable children that if you want to be a scientist or aviator or activist, you still have to conform to all of these expectations around having to be unrealistically skinny, physically attractive in certain ways, looking after the family and making tea, and so on. Counterfactually, the world is going to be a better place, or we are going to achieve these feminist goals better because children are likely to come across these figures in better ways, such as books, film, art, media, without the associated baggage, and be more inspired. So it's not always the easiest thing to flip these arguments, but this is something that is possible and you sometimes want to do if you identify an op argument that is fairly strong or something that you want to flip and around. Yes, we've got a contribution in the chat as well. Indeed, the clash is just what inspires young girls more. And yeah, that's another mechanism for how this could happen. Maybe OG could say that turning feminist figures into dolls trivializes their achievements and puts young girls off. Yeah, that's another way we could achieve this. Right? So this allows you to make a positive substantive claim compared to whatever op says, as opposed to just waiting for this argument to happen and giving a few responses. You now have the potential to win on this area of clash as well, which is why I think this is a very important approach when it comes to preemption. Right. Moving on then. Another thing you can do is, if all of that has failed, you might choose to outweigh or ignore arguments from the other side. You might want to ignore some of these things if they're unimportant and unlikely to be run. So if you have STEC and you have like this very cool case that you think the average person is not going to make, then probably don't have to preempt it. If you've already overloaded with a bunch of other things that you're already doing at PM, or if you just have no way of dealing with the argument, then you might choose to ignore them. But even in these situations, it's helpful for DPM to still be thinking about these things. Right. The other approach here is just outweighing things. So if we go back to this example about Green parties, one of the op arguments was you're going to lose support if you do Green centrism. And previously, we looked at one way of just winning this clash directly. That's probably what I would go to as my first option. But in addition to that, or if I couldn't figure out how to get Green parties more support under Green centrism, I might want to think about how I could possibly outweigh this claim, even within other arguments that I'm making. So the exercise here is, what is another clash that OG could be winning, and how could it be used to outweigh this claim? And I'll give us about 30 seconds to think about this. Right. That's 30 seconds. Any ideas? Oh, Becky?
Not too sure about this one. Can we say that we could say sure that they might end up losing support within, let's say the more left-leaning supporters might dip because this is not what they signed up for, but in the long term they get support maybe from the right-wing supporters or the right-wing parties themselves, which means they have significantly more power to do things like shape policies, which is far more beneficial. So even if we can agree that they might lose supporters, on a scale of probabilities, they get more outcome or more positive change with this than on the other side.
Yeah, exactly. This is basically what I've got written on the slide, and you'll be able to see that in a second. Maybe you lose support, but if you get more policy outcomes, if you get more environmental policy, if you get more climate action, it's probably worth it, right? So I think your first port of call is you still want to fight the support clash. But if you think about the debate on another level, I think my immediate intuition is that you do probably lose support if you do green centrism, at least from the left, but you're also more likely to get policy concessions, at least in some specific cases. So OG could be winning on climate action in terms of just who gets more action to stop or reduce climate change. And the strategy here is that within that, when you get to the end of your argument about climate action or environmental policy, you just want to weigh it either explicitly or by itself compared to things like support for green parties. So you could say something like climate action is the most important outcome in this debate. It's very important because it's quite likely to happen. We explained all of these situations where you're going to get X, Y, and Z policies. The impact is quite significant because it affects lots of people around the world. Even on a scaled level, if we reduce the amount of carbon being produced by a small amount, that's like less heat waves, less flooding, etc., and a lot fewer, thousands less people dying from climate change. And on a principled level, this is quite important as well because these tend to be more vulnerable people internationally. You could also give like comparative weighing as well. This matters more than support because support is not an inherent good in itself if it doesn't achieve anything. The point of green parties is generally to achieve their goals, and you can't do this. Like the goal is just climate and other kinds of environmental action. Right? So this is something you can do in addition to the other approaches. In this debate, if I were on OG, I'd probably just, my first reaction is on OG, I'm going to run two arguments. The first is just more action. Second is more support. But even within the end of the action argument, I would be weighing to explain why action is the thing that matters so much more. Right. The final approach here that I think is a common feature of effective preemption is to just make your arguments robust to challenges that are probably going to come at you. So during prep, and when you think about debates, often you will identify op claims that might not necessarily be arguments in themselves, but are responses to what you might say, or they might challenge things that you want to run. It's a good idea, more broadly, to ask yourself where you're likely to be challenged when you're developing an argument during prep time, perhaps also in your speeches if you haven't done it during prep. And a response here is to develop your arguments in a way that is more robust. So to make your arguments in a way that is robust to those challenges from the get-go, from PM, so DPM doesn't have to come and rebuild it, or if they only respond at DLO, the argument's still standing. Let's do an example. So we're back to green centrism. The prop argument that you probably want to run is you just get more climate action. And the op challenge here is very naturally, right-wing governments are captured by fossil fuel lobbyists, so they will never allow you to make climate action. Is there a way that you could explain, and this is the exercise, how climate action, the climate action argument, how could you make it in a way that is robust to this particular challenge that is probably coming from OpBitch? I'll give us 30 seconds to think about this. Any ideas? Yes, James?
I think arguing that, I mean, like the right wing is symmetric. In general, that's what I'm trying to argue. How's that? Keep pulling again.
I see. I don't think that solves the problem, right? Because, like, yes, this thing is symmetric. It's not an op argument, but it's also quite damaging towards your case if you're trying to argue that you're just going to get more climate action. So I think what you need to do here is to explain why right-wing governments aren't captured by fossil fuel lobbyists all the time. Or even better, I think, like, take this into account and still explain why you're going to get more climate action on your government side. And I think there's lots of different things you can point to. Obviously, this is just not true all of the time. I think it also helps to just identify specific situations when you're able to do something. So in many countries around the world, there's some version of proportional representation, or at least there are lots of different parties within parliament and governments have to form coalitions. So sometimes Green parties will be able to decide who becomes a government or not, because they have some seats in parliament. And if you add this to one side, that could get you a majority. And in at least those situations, they're going to have to offer you some concessions, right? Because otherwise you just don't join them, you join the other side, they still want to govern. It would help to point to some of these concessions, specific policies. They might have to be more right-wing policies. So they could be things like emissions trading schemes, or like investing in green technologies and research and development. It could be reducing regulation for green projects like building solar panels and wind farms. And you could even hopefully point to some countries where this has been done or you think it's going to happen, right? So I think, oh, I haven't actually written an answer here. I think that would be my answer to this. When you're making this argument in itself, you want to point to specific sorts of things that you're able to achieve. So when op gets up and gives this response, it's like, well, this is just not a very effective response. PM has already pointed to all of these things that they're able to achieve. Yes, Becky.
Just a question on how might this be a reasonable approach to say, I think building on the first one when you said that they're not captured by lobbyists all the time, right? Might be sometimes, and I think maybe we could try and show that those few times when they are not captured, that they have a really good amount of impact that we are willing to trade for, even if it means most times they're captured and they can't do much, that those few instances are far more beneficial than almost nothing at all.
Yeah, of course. And that's how you would describe the comparative, right? Like sometimes, yes, you're not always going to be able to get things. you're not always going to work with the right-wing parties. I think the info side of the motion was just that you would be willing to, if the conditions are right. The only difference is that when you do, you're doing it because you get something, right? And that's a benefit to your side. It wins you this particular clash. Right. Here is another one. So back to the Barbie motion. The argument that you want to make on prop, presumably from OG, is something like the nature of Barbie in itself makes this a fundamental principled role. And the op challenge here is there is magic buzzword accountability. So this will be magic buzzword done well. How could you make your argument here robust to this challenge that is coming out of opposition? 30 seconds. All right, any ideas?
I'm trying to get it to go. How workable that is. Yeah. Okay, so what I'm gonna argue, here is the reason why at the end of the day the nature of making these dolls makes it fundamentally principled wrong is that random notary of birth. It's that individuals live in infinite numbers, infinite possibilities, infinite realities, shapes and sizes, personalities, and the like. It's ultimately very difficult to tune and atone which specific individual is right. The idea then becomes that creating a subjective identity for what individuals ultimately need to look like is wrong, because every individual has different conditions under which they exist, different realities and different conditions. It means it becomes comparatively bad.
I think you've cut out, but I did catch most of that, and I think that certainly makes sense as one way you could approach this argument. I think I should probably add a bit more detail as to what the exact principle you're trying to run here from prop is. But what I would do here is I would point out at some point while making this argument that this, like there is no such thing as a Barbie that is done well. A Barbie that is done well is still a piece of plastic. It comes in, it's advertised by Mattel, it's sold in the same section as all of the other Barbies with their dream houses. And the child who's doing this, buying Barbie, is still looking for a toy who's still making a tea set. And what that means is, depending on what version of this principle you're running, perhaps it's like you should not be able to use an individual's memory like this. I think this is true regardless of how high quality you make the Barbie. Perhaps it's something about a lack of consent on the part of these individuals. That is true, regardless of how countable or high quality this Barbie is going to be, right? So I think within the explanation of your argument, you want to explain it in a way that means this particular challenge that teams will probably say these days is not damaging to the argument, and the argument is robust to that. Yes,
Can I
question?
ask a question? How would you make it robust if you attempted to show that like the making of these Barbie dolls is incompatible to like representing the fullness of what these feminist icons fought for, especially when it comes to appealing to younger girls?
Yeah, I think this is a very fair argument to run, and is some variation of this principle. I think just run it like any other argument with a couple of details. The specifics here is I would want to point to a couple of specific features of Barbie dolls. That means that like you're not really getting very much education out of this, right? Like you might give Amelia Earhart a toy airplane, or Katherine Johnson like a calculator and a compass within the Barbie set. but it's still a Barbie set. It's still made out of plastic. It's still sold in a toy section. You're still like probably going to put them in a toy box. And like the way you engage with a doll isn't you read a book or watch a documentary. It is you sit them down at the tea party with all of your other Barbies that are not feminist icons. And you still like pair them up with the Ken doll, the male one. And I think those are all features that, regardless of how well done or accountable these Barbies are fairly inherent. That means you're not capturing who these individuals are, as opposed to just playing into the Barbie stereotype. Right? So I think that's just details of how you make that argument. I think it would help to be very specific and identify specific features of Barbie that do that. Right. Moving on then. So far we've covered a bunch of, oh, we've got a question from James. Yeah.
I was going to ask, to what extent does it being an actor motion factor into how robust you make the argument?
I see. I don't think it makes a huge difference here, because like the arguments that are being made are about feminist goals or achieving good things in to feminism, right? So I don't think it makes a huge difference here, just because no one is running an argument that's like, this is going to be bad for the actor but good for the world overall. So I think in this, yeah, the things that teams are going to go for in this debate are just feminist goals. So that doesn't make a huge difference. I think if someone were to make a non-feminist argument, it just wouldn't be within this particular phrasing of the debate. So that's not something you would necessarily have to preempt here.
Thank you.
Right. Right. So what we've done so far is, I think we've done a lot of detail of a couple of different ways that we can preempt arguments. The rest of this presentation, and I think we've been going for about an hour, so I'll be efficient with it, is just a couple of thoughts about various other things that you should keep in mind, whether you're on opening government or other positions, when it comes to sort of interaction, preemption, engaging with the rest of the debate. The first of these is POIs and POCs, or points of clarification. The first thing I would say here is you should take points of clarification. This is just like good debating practice. If you haven't set up your stance well, teams should be allowed to ask you questions. You should try to answer those questions on the spot. Obviously, it's better if you decided during prep, but if the team asks you a point of clarification, you should take it. In addition to this, you should also take POIs. Generally, your priority will be the diagonal team if you're on opening. You can ask for a POI if you need one, and the team hasn't been offering POIs. And the reason why you should take POIs is generally you can do a very good job of predicting what's going to happen in the debate, but that still won't be as good as what the teams themselves have come up with, because that's what they're going to present. And POIs will often give you and your partner more of an idea of what the other side is going to run in the round beyond what you've predicted. And this is useful because if they've pointed out a gap within your argument, you can fill it in. If they've given you something to consider, you can rebut it. DPMs should also be listening to the POI as well, because they might hint at an argument that the other side is going to run, and then DPM can then build up a substantive and flip that point of clash preemptively. So that's some thoughts about POIs. Basically take them. Obviously, sometimes teams will run distracting POIs. You should try to do some assessment of whether this is actually something that op is likely to run or not, and spend your time accordingly. The next thing here is how you defend against closing from an opening team. Especially, so quite often you might be in this situation where you're on opening government, the other opening team is not very strong, or they might be like super strong and definitely going to take first in a round. So there's not a great deal you can do against them. You're either definitely winning or definitely losing. And the real competition in the round that you want to try and beat to maximize your points is your closing team. I think there's a misconception in these sorts of situations that you should run every possible argument at opening, so closing has nothing to say. This is quite difficult or impossible to do. Almost always closing will just pick one and vertically extend and beat you anyways. So I think the solution to these kinds of situations on opening to make you stand well against however the debate could turn out from closing, and this is another way of doing sort of preemption or weighing or strategy or whatever, is three things. The first is clarity. And by clarity, I mean you want to be very clear about the arguments that you're making and what you've shown. So you should label your arguments clearly by what sort of benefit or harm you're showing, such as more climate action, more support for green parties. This is a fundamental principled wrong against these feminist icons, those sorts of things. You want to be very clear about what you're showing and structure your case clearly so that judges will definitely pick this up and be able to refer to it during your deliberation. The second thing is rigor or robustness of your arguments. So if your OO is very weak and they don't challenge your argument in the ways that a stronger OO might do so, you still want to make sure that you've analyzed your arguments in a way that is solid and robust to the likely challenges that are happening. So you should be able to explain, for example, why the additional support you get as a Green Party practicing green centrism from the center or the right of politics is going to outweigh the loss of support you get from the left. Or just you probably want to have some rigor within your argument so it stands against those sorts of challenges. The final of these is weighing. I think three arguments that aren't fully impacted and weighed, probably as good as one or two arguments that are properly impacted and weighed. So you want to be very concrete in terms of what sorts of impacts you have achieved, and also weigh explicitly why those things matter quite greatly in the round, which means that you've shown more on opening, and then closing teams have to do more work in order to out-persuade. If you've shown 80 speaks worth of persuasive material, now that is a bar that the closing teams have to meet as well before they're able to beat you. And those are some thoughts on defending against closing. As for other positions in the debate, for DPM, the key thing I would highlight here is that your goal is to win the debate or maximize expected points for your team, not just beat the allo that has happened. So you should not just rebut the argument that is made at allo, but imagine during prep and the debate itself what the better version of it that DLO or CO could run. This is a lot easier to do if you've already thought about in prep. And once you've done that, you should try to win the clash. You can do destructive rebuttal, make a robust positive argument, etc. The other thing about DPM is that strategically, depending on circumstances, you might want to focus more on OO if you think that comparison is close and you could beat them or not. Or running new substantive and impacting away against closing teams if you think top half is fairly decided and you're trying to do more action against closing. Opening opposition. A lot of the things I've gone through in this session still apply. So you should still prep both sides for the debate so you know what the key issues are and you're able to deal with them, even though you have a bit more time within the debate to respond. You can countermodel and characterize our arguments if applicable. You should identify clashes and try to win them. You should try to make your arguments robust to likely challenges. And again, the same things apply when it comes to deputy strategy. Are you trying to beat your opening team? Are you trying to beat the closing teams? How does that affect your strategy? Do you do more responses? Do you run a new substantive argument? Do you impact in a way in an attempt to beat your closing teams? As for closing teams, I think there's two big groups of things I would say. The first is if your opening team has done a very good job of the things I've gone through in this session, they've made an argument of a clash that you want to win, they've preempted parts of your argument, it's not good enough, or I would say that you should do a little bit more than just make your extension as you conceived of it in prep. You want to go through and unpack their claims as part of the extension, because if you're not doing this, you're just providing counter-analysis to other teams. So maybe OG makes an argument about support, CO makes a counter-argument about support. It's quite difficult for the judge to adjudicate this. If at CO, you can also unpack and explain why the things at OG aren't right, or explain your argument in a way that beats up the things that OG has said, that is going to help you. You should also just, in general, during extension, be thinking about what the likely challenges are and make your arguments robust to them. As for the next 2 points, I think apply a little bit more to whips. Teams and whips should, in general, be thinking about and anticipating the other closing team's case during the round, instead of just waiting for it to happen, because that gives you less time to respond. And especially for government whips, you want to respond not just to the extension as it's made an opposition member, but how it could be rebuilt or made better at opposition whip as well, since that speech comes after yours and you don't have an ability to respond. That works in a way that's very similar to DPM. Right, I think that brings us to the end there. We've taken about an hour. So the summary here, if you don't take away anything else, is you should be thinking about both sides of the debate from the start of prep, so you have an idea of what's likely to happen. Effective preemption usually involves one or more of deleting arguments through modeling and characterization, identifying a clash and winning it, outweighing or ignoring material, making your arguments robust to likely challenges. And these things apply especially to OG and PM, but there are also implications for other teams and positions as well, as we've briefly discussed towards the end there. All right, are there any extraneous questions before we wrap up?